Everyone thought the story was over after the chaos, the headlines, and the courtroom moments that refused to fade. But now something doesn't add up. In 2026, whispers around Johnny Depp are getting louder, not because of another scandal, but because of a quiet, almost hidden connection no one can fully explain. No official statements, no confirmed appearances together, yet patterns are forming that fans can't ignore. Is this just coincidence, or is Johnny Depp finally stepping into something real again? And more importantly, is this the chapter that proves he has truly moved on? For years people believed they had already seen the final chapter of Johnny Depp's personal life unfold in public, every detail dissected, every relationship turned into global conversation, especially the highly publicized chapter involving Amber Heard. But what makes 2026 different is not noise, it's silence. The kind of silence that feels intentional, controlled, and almost calculated. No red carpet confirmations, no sudden announcements, just a series of small, almost invisible moments that when connected together begin to tell a completely different story. It started with sightings that didn't feel like typical celebrity rumors. Not paparazzi chaos, not staged leaks, but quiet appearances in places where cameras usually don't matter. A private art event in Europe, a low-profile dinner in London, and a studio visit in Paris where a woman, unidentified at the time, was seen entering and leaving within minutes of Depp's arrival. Nothing dramatic, nothing headline-grabbing on its own, but the pattern was too consistent to ignore. What made people pause wasn't just the presence of this mystery figure, it was Depp himself. Those who have followed his journey closely noticed something subtle but powerful. His energy had shifted. In past years, public appearances often carried a weight, a visible exhaustion behind the smile. But now, according to multiple reports including commentary discussed during interviews with entertainment analysts on BBC and Variety, there was a noticeable lightness. Not exaggerated happiness, but a calm confidence that hadn't been seen in a long time. And then came the detail that changed everything. During a small, almost overlooked interview while promoting a creative project, Depp made a statement that many dismissed at first. He said that he was finally in a place where peace feels natural again. No names, no context, but the timing raised questions. Because just days before that interview aired, fans had already begun circulating images of him walking alongside the same unidentified woman, both dressed casually, both avoiding attention, but clearly not alone. The internet did what it always does. Theories exploded. Some believed it was just a friend, others thought it might be a collaborator, but a growing number of observers pointed out something more specific. Body language. The kind that can't be scripted. The way they moved in sync, the way conversations seemed effortless, and most importantly, the absence of tension that had been so visible in previous public relationships. What makes this situation even more intriguing is the complete lack of denial. In the past, even minor rumors connected to Depp would trigger immediate responses from representatives or close sources. But this time, nothing. No confirmation, no rejection, just silence. And in celebrity culture, silence often speaks louder than statements. Another layer to this story comes from industry insiders who have cautiously hinted at changes behind the scenes. A report referenced by contributors at The Hollywood Reporter suggested that Depp has been spending more time in creative environments that are far removed from mainstream Hollywood pressure. Smaller productions, artistic collaborations, and private gatherings focused on music and visual art. Interestingly, the same unidentified woman has reportedly been seen in similar circles, not as a fan, but as someone who clearly belongs in that space. This is where the narrative shifts from speculation to something deeper. Because if this connection is real, it represents more than just a new relationship. It represents a completely different approach to life. No public validation, no need for headlines, just a quiet rebuilding of something that had been broken for years. And yet, the biggest question remains unanswered. Why now? Why after everything that has happened, after years of intense scrutiny, would Depp choose to allow even a hint of something personal to surface again? Some believe it's because enough time has passed. Others think it's because this time, things are fundamentally different. There is also the undeniable shadow of the past. No matter how much time moves forward, the connection to Amber Heard remains part of the narrative. Not because it defines him, but because it shaped public perception in a way that few celebrity stories ever have. The contrast between the highly visible, often chaotic chapter and this new, almost invisible connection is impossible to ignore. What's even more interesting is how fans are reacting. Instead of immediate judgment or divided opinions, there is a noticeable shift toward curiosity mixed with cautious support. People aren't rushing to conclusions. They're observing, analyzing, and waiting. Almost as if they understand that whatever this is, it's fragile, and forcing it into the spotlight too quickly could change everything. There are also those who remain skeptical. They argue that without confirmation, all of this could simply be coincidence, a series of unrelated moments being connected by an audience that wants to believe in a new chapter. And to be fair, that possibility exists. In a world driven by speculation, not every pattern leads to truth. But then there are the details that are harder to dismiss. The repeated locations, the consistent timing, and most importantly, the change in Depp's own behavior. These are not random. They suggest intention. They suggest presence. And they suggest that something, or someone, has become important enough to influence how he moves through the world again. As more time passes, the story continues to evolve, not through official announcements, but through fragments. A brief appearance here, a quiet interaction there, each piece adding to a puzzle that no one has fully solved yet. And that's what makes this different from every other headline-driven narrative. It's not being told directly. It's being discovered. And maybe that's exactly the point. Maybe this isn't a story meant to be announced, but one meant to unfold naturally, away from the pressure that once defined every aspect of his personal life. Because if there's one thing that becomes clear when looking at everything together, it's that control has returned. Not control over public opinion, but control over what is shared and what is kept private. And as the mystery continues to deepen, one thing becomes impossible to ignore. Whatever is happening in Johnny Depp's life right now is not accidental. It is deliberate, it is careful, and it is unlike anything we have seen from him before. And just when it feels like the pieces are starting to make sense, another detail emerges that changes everything again, revealing that this story might be far more complex than anyone initially thought. That new detail came from a place no one expected, not a paparazzi photo, not a gossip blog, but a controlled environment where authenticity matters more than speculation. During a closed-door discussion referenced later by contributors connected to Variety, a filmmaker who had recently collaborated with Johnny Depp described him as focused, grounded, and surprisingly present. Those three words might not sound dramatic, but for someone whose life had been surrounded by chaos for years, they carried weight. What stood out even more was what the filmmaker added next. He mentioned that Depp had been bringing someone along to creative sessions, someone who understands silence as much as conversation. Again, no name, no confirmation, but it aligned perfectly with what had already been observed. The same mysterious figure appearing in the same environments, not as an outsider, but as someone integrated into his world. This is where things started to feel less like coincidence and more like a pattern that was carefully unfolding. Because when multiple independent observations begin to point in the same direction, the probability of randomness starts to fade. And for fans who had followed every stage of his journey, this shift wasn't just noticeable, it was significant. Another layer of credibility came from a subtle but powerful moment during a recorded appearance that was later discussed across entertainment platforms including BBC. When asked about his current state of mind, Depp didn't deflect, didn't joke, didn't avoid. Instead, he paused, smiled slightly, and said that he had learned the value of quiet connections. That word quiet stood out. Not loud, not public, not performative. Quiet. For many, that single statement changed how everything else was interpreted. Because it suggested awareness. It suggested intention. And it suggested that whatever was happening was not accidental, but chosen. At the same time, observers began to notice something else that added another dimension to the story. Depp's schedule had shifted in ways that didn't align with his previous patterns. Fewer large-scale appearances, more selective engagements, and a clear preference for environments that allowed privacy. According to insights discussed by industry insiders connected to The Hollywood Reporter, this wasn't just a professional decision, it was personal. And then came a moment that many consider the most revealing so far. A short video clip, not widely circulated but enough to catch attention, showed Depp exiting a private venue late at night. Nothing unusual about that. But what happened next is what sparked conversation. He stopped, turned back, and waited. Seconds later, the same unidentified woman stepped out, and without hesitation, they walked side by side, not rushed, not hidden, just natural. There was no dramatic gesture, no obvious display, but sometimes the absence of performance says more than anything else. This wasn't about proving something to the world. It was about simply existing together without needing validation. Still, questions remained. Who is she? Why has there been no confirmation? And perhaps most importantly, why has this been handled so differently from everything in the past? Some believe the answer lies in experience. After everything that had unfolded in previous years, particularly the highly publicized and deeply scrutinized chapter involving Amber Heard, it would make sense that any future connection would be protected at all costs. Not hidden out of fear, but shielded out of understanding. Others suggest that this could be someone completely outside the typical Hollywood circle, which would explain the lack of leaks, the absence of public records, and the overall sense of distance from traditional media coverage. If true, it would represent a deliberate move toward a different kind of life, one that prioritizes stability over visibility. But perhaps the most compelling aspect of this entire situation is not the identity of the person involved, but the transformation it appears to have triggered. Because when you look at Depp now compared to even a few years ago, the difference is undeniable. Not just in appearance, but in presence. There is a calmness that cannot be faked. A sense of balance that doesn't come from public approval, but from something internal. And while it would be easy to attribute that solely to time and healing, the timing of these changes suggests that there may be more to it. Fans have also started to pick up on smaller, almost symbolic details. Subtle references in his artistic work, shifts in tone during interviews, and even changes in how he engages with those around him. None of these elements confirm anything directly, but together, they create a narrative that feels consistent. And yet, despite all of this, the story remains incomplete. No official acknowledgement, no direct confirmation, just a series of moments that continue to build on each other. It's almost as if the full picture is intentionally being revealed one piece at a time, allowing those who are paying attention to see it, while leaving enough ambiguity to protect what matters most. This balance between visibility and privacy is what makes this situation so unique. In an era where almost everything is shared instantly, choosing to reveal so little while still allowing a story to exist is rare. And it requires a level of control that few manage to maintain. As the weeks go on, more fragments begin to surface, each one adding depth to the mystery. A mention here, a sighting there, all pointing toward the same conclusion without ever stating it directly. And with each new piece, the question becomes less about whether something is happening, and more about what it actually means. Because if this truly is a new chapter, if this really is the beginning of something meaningful, then it represents more than just a personal milestone. It represents a shift in how one of the most talked about figures in recent years is choosing to live his life moving forward. And just when it seems like the narrative is starting to settle into something understandable, another unexpected detail begins to emerge, one that doesn't just add to the mystery, but challenges everything people thought they had figured out so far. That unexpected detail didn't come from a sighting or a casual mention. It came from a space where information is usually controlled and verified. During a quiet industry gathering discussed later by contributors linked to The Hollywood Reporter, a producer who had interacted closely with Johnny Depp revealed something that immediately shifted the narrative. He described a moment where Depp was asked about future plans, not professionally, but personally. Instead of avoiding the question, Depp reportedly responded with a calm confidence, saying that he was not looking back anymore. Those words might sound simple, but in context, they carried a deeper meaning. Because for years, everything surrounding him had been tied to the past, to what happened, to what was said, to what was proven and what remained debated. The connection to Amber Heard had become more than just a chapter, it had become a reference point for everything that followed. So when someone like Depp openly signals that he is no longer anchored to the past, it forces people to reconsider everything they thought they understood. But what made this moment even more intriguing was what happened after. According to the same discussion, the producer noted that Depp briefly glanced toward someone standing across the room before giving that answer. No names were mentioned, but those present reportedly understood the implication without needing it to be explained. It was subtle, almost unnoticeable to an outsider, but in a room full of observers trained to read behavior, it didn't go ignored. Around the same time, a separate observation began to gain attention among fans who track patterns rather than headlines. Depp had started appearing in locations that held personal significance rather than professional necessity. Smaller coastal towns, quiet artistic communities, and places known more for privacy than publicity. Interestingly, these were not random choices. According to insights discussed on platforms associated with BBC, these environments are often chosen by individuals who are intentionally stepping away from high-pressure public life. And once again, the same unidentified presence seemed to align with these movements. Not always visible, not always confirmed, but consistently connected through timing and location. It was as if two separate paths were moving in perfect synchronization without ever needing to announce it. This is where the story begins to move beyond curiosity and into something more complex. Because when behavior, environment, and subtle confirmation all point in the same direction, it suggests something that is being lived, not performed, and that distinction matters. Another moment that added weight to this evolving narrative came from a recorded conversation that was later analyzed by entertainment commentators connected to Variety. During this exchange, Depp was asked about trust, a topic that had been central to his public story for years. Instead of giving a guarded or philosophical answer, he said something that stood out immediately. He said that trust is something you rebuild quietly, with the right person, away from noise. That phrase "right person" became a focal point for many, because it implied presence. It implied that this wasn't just a theoretical idea, but something he was actively experiencing. And when combined with everything else that had been observed, it added another layer of meaning to the ongoing mystery. At the same time, there were shifts happening that went beyond words. People who had worked with Depp in recent months began to describe a different kind of engagement. More attentive, more focused, and noticeably more at ease. These are not changes that happen overnight, and they rarely happen without a reason. Some insiders cautiously suggested that this transformation might be connected to stability in his personal life. Not confirmed, not officially stated, but implied through consistent observation. And while speculation always carries risk, patterns like these are difficult to ignore when they continue to repeat across different environments and sources. What makes this situation even more compelling is the absence of contradiction. In most cases, rumors of this nature are quickly challenged, corrected, or dismissed. But here, there is nothing pushing back. No statements denying the connection, no representatives clarifying misunderstandings. Just a continued silence that allows the narrative to grow organically. And yet, despite all of this, the identity of the person at the center of this story remains unknown. No confirmed background, no verified profession, no public profile that clearly connects all the dots. Which raises an important question. Is this anonymity intentional, or is it simply a reflection of someone who exists completely outside the world that Depp has spent most of his life in? If it is intentional, then it suggests a level of protection that goes beyond typical privacy. It suggests a conscious decision to keep something real separate from something public. And given everything that has happened in the past, that decision would make sense. There is also another possibility, one that some observers have started to consider more seriously. What if the mystery itself is part of the boundary? Not a strategy, not a tactic, but a natural result of choosing not to explain something that doesn't need explanation. In a world where everything is expected to be defined and labeled, choosing not to define something can be powerful. But even with that perspective, curiosity remains. Because human nature looks for answers, especially when patterns become too consistent to ignore. And with each new detail, the desire to understand what is really happening only grows stronger. Then came another moment, quiet but significant. During a late evening appearance captured briefly and later discussed among online communities, Depp was seen laughing in a way that many described as unfamiliar. Not forced, not controlled, but genuinely relaxed. And standing just outside the frame, partially visible, was a figure that matched the description of the same person seen in previous sightings. That moment didn't confirm anything directly, but it reinforced everything indirectly. Because authenticity is difficult to fake, especially when it appears in unguarded situations. And for many, that single glimpse said more than any official statement ever could. As the narrative continues to unfold, it becomes clear that this is not a typical celebrity story. There are no dramatic reveals, no orchestrated announcements, no clear beginning or defined direction. Instead, there is a gradual emergence of something that feels real precisely because it is not being forced into the spotlight. And maybe that is the most important detail of all. Because after years of living in a world where every aspect of his life was amplified, analyzed, and often misunderstood, choosing to build something quietly might be the most significant change he could make. Still, questions remain, and they likely will for some time. But perhaps the focus is starting to shift away from needing immediate answers and toward understanding the bigger picture. A picture that suggests healing, growth, and the possibility of something new. And just when it feels like the pieces are finally aligning into a clearer image, another layer begins to reveal itself, one that doesn't just add to the mystery, but introduces a perspective that no one had fully considered until now. That new perspective didn't come from inside Hollywood or from the usual circles that track every movement of Johnny Depp. It came from a completely different angle, one that focused less on who this mystery person is and more on what this connection is doing to him as a person. Because if you step back and look at everything together, a pattern starts to emerge that goes beyond romance and into transformation. People close to creative spaces where Depp has recently spent time began describing something unusual. Not dramatic, not exaggerated, but consistent. They said he listens more now. He pauses before speaking. He seems less interested in controlling the room and more interested in understanding it. These are subtle behavioral shifts, but in someone whose life has been lived under constant pressure, they matter. A discussion referenced through commentary tied to BBC explored this exact idea, suggesting that individuals who go through prolonged public scrutiny often develop either defensive patterns or complete withdrawal. But in rare cases, they evolve into something else entirely, a version of themselves that is more selective, more grounded, and more aware of what truly matters. And that description seems to align closely with what is being observed now. This is where the story takes on a deeper meaning. Because instead of asking whether Johnny Depp has moved on, the more important question becomes how he has moved on. Not just from a person, but from a phase of life that defined him in ways few experiences ever could. The connection to Amber Heard will always exist as part of his history, but what's happening now suggests that it no longer defines his present. Another layer that adds weight to this perspective comes from a quiet but revealing interaction that was later mentioned by contributors connected to Variety. During a casual conversation, Depp was asked what he values most at this stage of his life. Instead of referencing career, legacy, or public perception, he answered with one word: clarity. That answer stood out because it reflects a shift away from external validation and toward internal stability. And when you combine that with everything else, the quiet appearances, the consistent presence of someone who remains unidentified, the absence of denial, and the noticeable change in behavior, it begins to form a narrative that feels less like speculation and more like evolution. There is also something else that hasn't been discussed enough, something that might explain why this entire situation feels so different from anything before. Control. Not control in the sense of managing public image, but control over access. Who gets to see what, who gets to know what, and most importantly, what remains private. In previous years, much of Depp's life felt exposed, sometimes by choice, sometimes not. But now, there is a clear boundary. Information is not leaking in the way it once did. Moments are not being captured in the same chaotic way. And even when something surfaces, it feels incomplete, as if only a fraction of the full picture is being allowed through. This kind of control doesn't happen by accident. It requires intention, discipline, and often, a reason strong enough to maintain it. And many believe that reason could be the very thing everyone is trying to understand. The presence of someone who exists outside the usual system and therefore doesn't play by its rules. Because if this person is not part of the industry, not connected to media cycles, and not interested in public attention, then it would explain why the story feels so contained. It would also explain why there is no rush to define it, no urgency to confirm or deny. But beyond all the theories and observations, there is a more human element that continues to stand out. The idea that after everything, after years of being at the center of one of the most talked about personal stories in modern entertainment, Depp might have found something that allows him to exist without performance. That idea is supported by another subtle but meaningful detail. Those who have interacted with him recently often mention a sense of presence that wasn't there before. Not distracted, not guarded, just present. And presence is often a reflection of where someone feels safe. This brings the focus back to the central mystery, not just who this person is, but what they represent. Because sometimes, the identity matters less than the impact. And the impact here appears to be significant. There are still skeptics, of course. Those who believe that without confirmation, none of this should be taken seriously. And that perspective is valid. Speculation without proof can easily lead to false narratives. But what makes this situation different is the consistency. The repetition of small details that continue to align over time. And consistency, especially in environments where randomness is common, is difficult to ignore. Another moment that added to this growing narrative came from a late-night discussion among entertainment insiders, later referenced through conversations connected to The Hollywood Reporter. One participant described Depp as someone who has stopped reacting and started choosing. That distinction is important. Reacting is often tied to external pressure, while choosing is a sign of internal control. And if that observation is accurate, then it suggests that whatever is happening now is not something he has fallen into, but something he has consciously stepped into. As time continues to move forward, the story doesn't become clearer in the traditional sense. There are no headlines that confirm everything, no single moment that explains it all. Instead, it becomes clearer in a different way, through understanding rather than information. Understanding that change doesn't always announce itself. Understanding that some of the most important parts of a person's life happen away from public view. And understanding that moving on is not always about replacing the past, but about redefining the present. And that might be the most important takeaway from everything that has been observed so far. Not whether Johnny Depp is in a new relationship, but whether he has reached a point where something new is even possible again. Because for a long time, that possibility didn't seem real. The weight of everything that had happened made it hard to imagine a future that wasn't connected to the past. But now, piece by piece, that future is starting to take shape. And just when it feels like the story has reached a point where it can finally be understood, one final detail begins to surface, not louder than the others, not more dramatic, but more revealing in a way that changes how everything before it is interpreted. If you've made it this far, then you already see what most people missed. This isn't just about a rumor. It's about a shift that's happening right in front of everyone but only a few are paying attention to. So now the real question is, what do you think? Is Johnny Depp quietly building something real away from the spotlight, or is this just another mystery that the world is trying too hard to solve? Drop your thoughts below because your perspective matters more than you think, and if you want more stories like this that go deeper than headlines, make sure you stay connected because the next reveal might change everything again.